are oppressed. We are exploited. We are denied not only civil rights, but even human rights.
How great I am.
If you're some man of the rock,
You want first place, come play with me. You want second place, go somewhere else.
Let us sing forever. Let us play forever.
Wake your ass up. Awaken the beast inside.
Welcome back to episode 96, the realest podcast in the world. We are What Are You Saying? We are your host, Osama.
My name is Muhammad.
And today we have another episode for Black History Month. But, Muhammad, you got to start it off, buddy.
Thank you to everyone that listened to the last episode. We are so thankful. And once again, for those who are not aware, this is pretty much a series within the month of Black History. And what I wanted to do was to take different topics and create an overlying theme pertaining to the struggles and also the celebration of Black people as an art, as a movement, and just as a culture overall. And in fact, I think that this is necessary. It has to be done. The way I'm doing it obviously is not normal, but at the same time, for those who are interested, for those whether Black or not, you could try to figure out the different themes, topics, and just ideas that I throw out, and it's on you to really dig in those roots and try to take out the context, the history, and to really figure out what I'm saying and how you can really expand it as far as trying to figure out the big picture so we can end this theme, end this struggle, and this notion that Blacks are less, that we have no sense, and that everything we have built up until this date is not because of our minds and our intellect and our hard work. It's just the fact that we are a race of people who have no sense, ideal, or notion about how the world works, and we're only good for our bodies. But we're simply more than that. Aren't we, Osama?
Absolutely. The thing is, what people don't understand is Black history is so rich, whether it's coming from, like, obviously, we're Muslim, and obviously from an Islamic perspective, like, religious leaders, religious companions are, a lot of them are Black. A lot of them had, just to name some people, like Bilal Rabah, who was the person who called a prayer, and obviously you have Osama bin Zaid, who was at 18 years old, who was like the leader to go to war for the Muslims, right? And obviously you have Muhammad Ali, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King. You have so many people who, when you think of Black history, like, the question kind of remains is like, why is racism still here? Why do people still believe? And it kind of goes back to our last episode. What do you see me as, right? The thing is, if you're going to ask me, majority of my close friends are Black, and they're people who I look up to. They're people who drive me. Like, they're people who I consider family. And my closest friends happen to be Black, and I'm Arab. And I think that, to me, just to, like, I guess, come full circle before I guess I ask you your first question is, I think, yes, obviously February is Black History Month, but to me, because majority of my close friends are Black, and I have a lot of friends who are close friends who are Black to me, and, like, they've always been by my side, I celebrate them every single day because the people that I look up to happen to be Black, and it's not fair for 1 month. To me, every month has to be celebrated because so many Black people who have done stuff for us that without them we would not be here.
I wholeheartedly agree, and it's not only about Blacks as well, it's different races, all races as well included, right? And today's episode especially, it's called Internal Wars. The way it's designed, the way it's going to be discussed, even from the beginning, it won't make any sense to most, but by the end we're done. Hopefully you get an idea and the understanding of what I'm trying to say.
All right, so let's ask the first question to Mr. Muhammad Al Hassan. Guys, I just want to say, if I sounded nervous last episode, it's because a lot of the questions were kind of hard to ask. And but this is why we're in ways, and you have to ask those hard-hitting questions. First question, Mr. Muhammad Al Hassan. How does the separation between house versus field African Americans slaves relate to Black History Month?
Yeah, so during Black History Month, usually the concept of the house versus the field slave, Negroes, is really not talked about, obviously because of the history and the elements and the division between Blacks. This episode, Internal Wars, I want to discuss the inner dilemma, the intersection that's actually amongst Black, and how division in different kind of fields had led to this internal war that hasn't helped. And if we think that it's not a part of our history, it is. It's actually more contributing to Black History Month than we actually realize. And the point is to start from a historical background and bring it forth to light. So when you ask me that question, can you ask the question one more time, Osama?
The question that I asked is, how does the separation between house versus field African American slave relate to Black History Month?
The beautiful way to start it off, once again, is with the quote. Malcolm X, as we all know, famous activist, thinker, philosopher, Muslim, and a man who had a transformation unlike no other. I highly suggest everyone to read the book, The Autobiography of Malcolm X, written by Alex Haley. In a speech given in 1963 on January 23rd in East Lansing, Michigan State University, Malcolm X describes the difference between the house and the field Negro. So this is what he says. So you have two types of Negroes, the old type and the new type. Most of you know the old type. When you read about him in history, during slavery, he was called Uncle Tom. He was the house Negro. And during slavery, you had two Negroes. You had the house Negro and the field Negro. The house Negro usually lived close to his master. He dressed like his master. He wore his master's secondhand clothes. He ate food that the master left on the table. And he lived in his master's house, probably in the basement or the attic. But he still lived in the master's house. So whenever that house Negro identified himself, he always identified himself in the same sense that his master identified himself. When his master said, "We have good food," the house Negro would say, "Yes, we have plenty of good food. We have plenty of good food." When the master said that, "We have a fine home here," the house Negro would say, "Yes, we have a fine home here." When the master would be sick, the house Negro identified himself so much with his master, he'd say, "What's the matter, boss? We sick?" His master's pain was his pain. And sorry for the accent, I just decided to go for it. I'll continue on. So Malcolm says, and it hurt him more for his master to be sick than for him to be sick himself. When the house started burning down, that type of Negro would fight harder to put the master's house out than the master himself would. But then you had another Negro on the field. The house Negro was in the minority, the masses. The field Negroes were the masses. They came along in the majority. When the master got sick, they prayed that he died, and they would laugh. If his house caught on fire, they prayed for a wind to come along and to fan the breeze. If someone came in the house Negro and said, "Let's go, let's separate," naturally that Uncle Tom would say, "Go where? What can I do without the boss? Where would I live? How would I dress? Who would look out for me?" That's the house Negro. But if you went to the field Negro and said, "Let's go, let's separate," he wouldn't even ask you where or how. He would say, "Yes, let's go." And that one ended right there. So now you have a 20th century type of house Negro, a 20th century Uncle Tom. He's just as much an Uncle Tom today as Uncle Tom was 100 or 200 years ago. He's only a modern Uncle Tom. The Uncle Tom wore a handkerchief around his head. This Uncle Tom wears a top hat. He's sharp. He dresses just like you do. He speaks the same phraseology, the same language. He tries to speak it better than you do. He speaks with the same accents, same diction. And when you say your army, he says our army. He hasn't got anybody to defend him. But anytime he says we, he says we. Our president, our government, our Senate, our congressmen, are this and are that. He hasn't even got a seat in that R, even at the end of the line. So this is the 20th century Negro. Whenever you say you, the personal pronoun in the singular or in the plural, he uses it right along with you. And when you say you're in trouble, he says, "Yes, we're in trouble." But there's another kind of black man on the scene. If you say you're in trouble, he says, "Yes, you're in trouble." He doesn't identify himself with your plight whatsoever. With that quote in itself, Malcolm X, he clearly identifies and establishes the beginning of the separation of the African American race. Obviously, during slavery and as it leads into today. And obviously, we are in the 21st century. And the fact that Malcolm X talks about the house versus the field Negroes, the same race, two different groups, different ideologies, two different facets of life and realities. And somehow they couldn't coexist. And people think that it stops at that. But that mindset and that thinking and that pattern and that theory continued on today. Those lessons and those shapes and habits, it trended towards as time became more modern. So as blacks started to migrate towards the north, like Chicago and New York and different places, and obviously into Canada as well, they wanted to take on a new identity, a new pride, a new way of thinking. They didn't want to look like the people of the South, just country, working in farms, cotton. No, they want to be established. So that's why you had the rise of entertainment, Hollywood, minstrel shows, and were able to travel for the first time across the U.S. and really gained a perspective unlike before, unlike their predecessors who only worked on farms for hours under the hot sun. So the house versus field Negro, it continues on to today. Why you might say that is because there's a modern Uncle Tom and there's a modern field Negro. But to define the two, that's the problem, because we live in an individualistic society. Me trying to find out who I am as far as the individual, I can't be punished for that. I can't be tamed for that. I can't be labeled as bad for that, because that's the society we live in. But at the end of the day, if we are one race, we are still a collective at the end of the day. So when I talk about the house versus field Negro, I'm going to give examples. Now, the examples I'm going to give, I'm not saying one's a house and one's a field Negro, but I'll explain my reason after I give you this list. So here's a list of two comparative figures at the respective time. After I read this list, Osama, you tell me the list I give you, am I saying this as together or versus each other? Okay? Now, I'm going to start from beginning. We have W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington, two amazing historical figures. W.E.B. Du Bois, an American sociologist, author, and one of the greatest people of history, contributed to the NAACP party. And we have Booker T. Washington, obviously founder of Tuskegee Institute, and the person who was known for getting black people as far as education during the early 1900s. And then you have Marcus Garvey as well on the side. Next, we have Malcolm X and we have Martin Luther King. Next, we have Huey P. Newton and Eldridge Cleaver. Next, we have Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Wilt Chamberlain. Next, we have Michael Jackson and we have Prince. Next, we have Biggie and we have Tupac. Next, we have Lil' Kim and we have Foxy Brown. Next, we have Jay-Z and we have Nas. Next, we have Drake and we have Kanye. Next, we have Cardi B and we have Nicki Minaj. Osama, all those individuals I listed, are they together or were they divided at one point in time in history? And once again, obviously, all those names I expected, I don't expect you to know all those names. Some of those names, even African Americans wouldn't know because of the history and the time span as far as generations. The reason why I said all those names, because during that respective time in history, they were amongst the noble, they're amongst the most honorary of people in their time, and who represented the race, whether they liked it or not, whether they knew or not. Obviously, most of the time they knew, and they carried on their backs. But the fact that when I said the pairs, they weren't together, essentially. It was a versus. So when you have an example, Malcolm X versus Martin Luther King, as we all know the history, like, they both fought for the rights, for the civil liberty of African Americans. And that was a struggle in itself. And it ultimately cost them their own lives. They had differences. But at the end of the day, they still worked. They tried to work collaboratively to get the job done. And to be honest, they actually became the same person as far as their own philosophy towards the end of their life. And as time would know it, even when they tried to meet up, things just never happened, but those were differences. But in the beginning, they were very stern on their philosophy and ideology, and it caused a shift. You couldn't be both. You had to be one or the other. And it's the same thing. Michael Jackson versus Prince. It's just music. It's not even politics. Same thing, one or the other. You couldn't be both. Recent times, as we can see with Drake and Kanye, You had Certified Lover Boy, you had Donda. You couldn't support both. You had to be one or the other. It's the same thing, W. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington. These guys are literally breaking down barriers and shifting the black consciousness into a plight that we've never seen before. But even then, their differences that they had at that time still made one had to choose one or the other. And I said Marcus Garvey because Marcus Garvey, obviously with his movement as well, he was really, to be honest, a person I should have mentioned. But I want to give those two guys, W. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington. But Marcus Garvey was really in there as well. And even then themselves had their differences with Marcus Garvey. And even then, you couldn't support. It was one or the other. So this notion, this idea, this sense that it's me versus you. My way is better than your way. And we cannot coexist. So therefore, I'm going to take my people this way. You take your people that way. And we do not want to share resources. We do not want to share interest. We do not want to share commonality. The only commonality between us is the color of our skin. Everything else, I could care less. And when you see this from a historical time stamp, from the first to the last example, this is literally the late 1800s up until now, Osama. It's a long time in history of division between great black figures. Why is it that great black figures in their respective time, despite the art, whether it's politics, music, business, there's more references I could have given, but I just want to give some that people from different generations can understand. Why is it that different figures in the respective time cannot coexist with the other figure and share resources, pools of information, and accessibility to extenuate, to extend, to influence, to reshape the overall structure of the black plight? Because that's the goal at the end of the day, right? And once again, people, this is my opinion. I don't have the answers. I'm just a person trying to figure things out like anyone else. And I'm thinking about even Muhammad Ali versus Joe Frazier. And the fact that, once again, two different ideologies. Muhammad Ali coming from a person named Cassius Clay, knowing the Nation of Islam, and then figuring out his life and figuring out that this black identity that he associated himself with was the path. And anyone that was against it and did not understand it and chose to insult him about it was his enemy. And he made sure that people such as Floyd Patterson and different other opponents,
Ernie Terrell
suffered. But the reason why I say Joe Frazier, because Joe Frazier was a respected boxer as well, and obviously fighter of the century in 1971, and MSG famously beat Muhammad Ali and broke his jaw. But even then, before the fight promotion, as we all know, Muhammad Ali is a great orator, a great salesman. Conor McGregor, all these guys that hype up fights, Muhammad Ali was the original one. He was doing it at a time where no one thought he was even believable. He created the conception that is today as far as marketing a fight. And he was calling Joe Frazier a gorilla, a big, black, ugly gorilla. And it hurt Joe Frazier because they knew each other. They had a personal relationship. And even then, like, Ali is just trying to sell a fight. He's thinking of a marketing perspective. Joe Frazier is like, man, you are hurting me as a man and as a black man as well. We're the same. We're no different. This fight, we're going to fight, and then guess what? We're going to shake hands and move on. But this pain that you're causing me, my family, and my lineage, you're Muhammad Ali. You're the most famous man in America, black person at that time. This is going to stay with us after we die. And guess we're still talking about it today. So Muhammad Ali, a lot of things that he said, he regretted it because, sorry for my voice, I drank coffee. I should have done that. Second time I did that.
It's all good, man. Sometimes you need a break. Sometimes you need a break when you're talking about ways. Things get heated up, so you got to be hydrated.
No, someone knows, I'm not supposed to drink coffee. I usually always drink tea, but I decided to drink coffee before, and that's why yeah, I know. And
let me ask you.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
Right. Dumb question, mind you. That's a question. You mentioned all these names. Obviously, more powerful names that we've spoken about in the past and that you have taught me about. Now, how strong would these people? How strong would they be? Had verses against each other would have never existed. If they coexisted, how powerful would they be?
I'm gonna save that for the end because that's the solution. That's the last part of the episode.
Yeah. So
because the thing is, such a episode like this requires a lot of time, a lot of information. So we're only talking about light things. We're not talking about politics, economics, and social issues. We're just talking about a broad theme, and we're just dipping in different sectors of it, right? So obviously an issue like this cannot be discussed, interpreted, analyzed within 40 minutes. It's literally impossible. So even the references I give as far as the figures, to go more in depth into their history as far as the differences between them, will literally be an episode per pair. And obviously we don't have the time to do that, right? So I'm just giving light examples. Once again, it's on the listener to go out and seek that information and find out the differences between Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Wilt Chamberlain, to find the differences between Nas and Jay-Z, the differences between Joe Frazier and Muhammad Ali, and to come up with the conception that you said. What would have been the difference in that type of era if those two people had come together?
this is getting really juicy, guys. If you're still listening, by the way, we appreciate you. Does it matter if one is a light skin or a dark skin?
No, of course not. And this part of the episode is about colorism. Now, when it comes to colorism, as we all know, last episode we addressed it, race, what it is, and how we are made of different colors and races. When we talk about the house Negro and the field Negro, two distinct types, but one thing we should be adding and giving light to is the fact that during slavery, those who had lighter complexion, light skin, yellow bone, fair, red bone, they were actually given the opportunity to be in the house. And because of their fair complexion, they were treated nicely, they received less punishment, they ate more meals, they were able to travel and go to different farms and slave plantations, and they had a more sense of peace during that horrific time, that horrendous era, compared to those of darker complexion. And even from then, it created a stigma, it created a problem, it creating a reoccurring pattern, cycle that continues on to today. And as you can see, you see it in memes, you see it in jokes, you see it in videos, you see it in just groups, subgroups amongst Black people themselves. But it starts from way back when. So there is an issue between light skin and dark skin. It doesn't matter, but it does matter. Why? Because we gave power to it. The first quote I want to give is by Zora Neale Hurston, famous author, photographer, Black woman. And she has a book. It's called Dust Tracks on a Road. Osama, this is written in 1942. This is what she says. I found the Negro, and always the blackest Negro, being the butt of all jokes, particularly Black women. Another thing she says, if it was so honorable and glorious to be Black, why was it the yellow-skinned people among us had so much prestige? Even a child in the first grade could see that this was so from what happened in the classroom and on school programs. The light-skinned children were always the angels, the fairies, and queens of school play. The lighter the girl, the more money and prestige she was apt to marry. So on into high school years, I was asking myself questions. This is what she says. This is in 1942, Osama. Pretty much what she's describing is this what she's describing is how we grow up. So how we grow up as Black people, obviously we grow up in our houses and we have a culture as far as how we do things when it comes to politics, social, and cultural things. Now, as we grow up from a young age, the light-skinned girl is always seen as this beauty, this identity queen, this thing of light. And people always grasp towards that. Men will fight over for her. And like she says, it goes from just playing around as kids, giving her extra attention, to even high school when people have the courage and the desire to lust over her. And it grows up into society as well. When you go to university and college and the workforce, there's always an attachment to the light-skinned girl compared to the dark-skinned girl. That woman wrote that in 1942. So the fact that it continues on to today, it's a problem. But the thing is, once again, it's not that people grow up going after the light-skinned girl because she's more beautiful. It's the fact that it's identity crisis within the Black stigma itself. It's the fact that since slavery, darker complexions was taught, was told, was curated as being worse, being less than, being inherently evil. So in different places of the country where a black person was hanged, mutilated, tortured, a person of fair complexion can kind of weave their way in and out. So you have different groups of individuals weaving in and out of society, whether it's a low, medium, or high class during those times. And as they're able to weave in and out, you take notice. And this kind of transitions into different eras in time in history. So when it comes to now, when society is more integrated, that weaving in and out is done, but knowing the prestige and status and easiness that they've received, one goes after that. One wants that, leaving the darker skin complexion. And guess what? You know what that does to you, Osama? It creates a self-hate image. It creates a self-hate thought, perspective, an idea that you are less than and you'll always be less than because of your complexion. Now, once again, I'm not saying that every light-skinned person is a bad person. I'm not saying that every dark-skinned person is an angry, bitter person. No, but there is a separation between blacks only based on color. Do you know that if I go somewhere, if I meet a black person, they might not talk to me because of everything they went through, that persecution of being a fair-skinned person, being called light-skinned, being called yellow bone, red bone, things that they're taught, things that they were, tortured with just from dark-skinned people. Because of that, they hate them forever. And they're only going to raise a lineage of light-skin equality or inclusion. And on the other side, there's a lot of black people, even I know myself, that have a thing towards light skins because of the status, because of the access they get in society, and the fact that they kind of look down on those of dark complexion. And because of that, before they even meet an individual, they'll give them a look with anger, give them a look of disgust, and would look the other way and not even listen to what the person has to say, even if one has an offer of peace, serenity, and power, equality, because at the end of the day, you are the same race. So knowing that this weave in and weave out of just being integrated in society and the experiences it shaped for the black, whether it's a light and dark complexion, also contributes to Black History Month and is a huge signifier that people do not talk about because they think as if it does not matter and it doesn't really equate to the significance of Black History Month. You cannot talk about Black history without talking about the distinct type between the Field and House Negro and how it leads up to today. You cannot talk about Black History Month without acknowledging the history and the stigma and the problems facing colorism between darks versus light. This is deeper than we all think. Very deep. You know how deep it is, Osama?
Well, to be quite honest with you, I can't say I fully, I can't say, because obviously within the Arab race, depending on your skin color, depending where you come from, you are treated differently. Like, for example, a lot of Arabs that I know, a lot of them are white, but I'm not white. I'm more fair tone. And coming with that, you do get treated a lot differently from other people, sometimes from your race. So I do know how deep that question is. And I definitely do believe with some people it affects them till this day because of the struggles they have to go through.
No, you're right. Totally fair. And yeah, it's beyond blacks. Once again, there's always going to be stigma within other races, even for Indians as well. There's an issue as far as colorism within itself, whether you're dark or light. It happens in every race. That re-imaging of light is better or dark is better under some context is a problem in society within itself. But I'm talking about from an African American perspective. To end this topic, I want to give a quote by, once again, Malcolm X on February 16th, 1965, 1 week before he's assassinated. This is what he says. It's imagery. They use their ability to create images, and then they use these images that they created to mislead the people. You have to understand it. Until 1959, the image of the African continent was created by the enemies of Africa. As these Europeans dominated the continent of Africa, it was they who created the image of Africa that was projected abroad. And they projected Africa and the people of Africa in a negative light, a hateful image. Then they made us think that Africa was a land of jungles, a land of animals, a land of cannibals and savages. It was a hateful image. And because they were so successful in projecting this negative image of Africa, those of us here in the West of African ancestry, the Afro-American, we looked upon Africa as a hateful place. We looked upon the African as a hateful person. And if you referred to us as an African, it was like putting us as a servant or playing house or talking about us in the way we didn't want to be talked. Those who oppress knew that they can't make a person hate the root without making them hate the tree. You can't hate your own and not end up hating yourself. And since we all originated in Africa, you can't make us hate Africa without making us hate ourselves. And then they did this very skillfully. And what was the result? They ended up with 22 million black people here in America who hated everything about us that was African. We hated the African characteristics. We hated our hair. We hated our nose, the shape of our nose, and the shape of our lips, the color of our skin. Yes, we did. It was you who taught us to hate ourselves simply by shrewdly maneuvering us into hating the land of our forefathers and the people on that continent. As long as we hated those people, we hated ourselves. As long as we hated what we thought they looked like, we hated what was actually looked like. When you teach a man to hate his lips, the lips that God gave him, the shape of the nose that God gave him, the texture of the hair that God gave him, the color of the skin that God gave him, you've committed the worst crime that a race of people can commit. And this is the crime you've committed. Our color became a chain, a psychological chain. Our blood, African blood, became a psychological chain, a prison, because we were ashamed of it. We felt trapped because our skin was black. We felt trapped because we had African blood in our veins. This is how you imprison us. Not just bringing us over here and making us slaves, but the image that you created of our motherland and the image that you created of our people on that continent was a trap, was a prison, was a chain, was the worst form of slavery that has ever been invented by a so-called civilized race and a civilized nation since the beginning of the world. You still see the result of it among our people in this country today. So pretty much at the conclusion of this conversation, how does a race overcome their internal struggles? Is by understanding themselves, is by realizing that there is a problem. Not that there's a problem from the outside. Yes, we understand there's a problem from the outside. We are being attacked internally, externally by different forces on different fields in different sectors of society, whether it's educational, political, judicial, like there's different forms, social classes, police reformation, like police reforms. Like we want all these things and it hasn't materialized yet. So until then, we understand there's an enemy against us, and that enemy and how it works, there's different layers to it. But that's an outside problem, and we deal with it knowing that's an outside problem. Inside our house, inside this place that we call home, where different people from different countries under the race of blacks can operate, coexist as one. We are not a unified body, Osama. For a race to be beautiful, for a race to be as bright as the sun, has to be under the embodiment of one body. And we are not. We have different cultures, different ideals, different understandings, and that is no problem. But at the end of the day, there has to be unity. But even from a colorist standpoint, if we hold one different, higher or less than, that's a problem. We must erase it. We know that there's things that was put into play by outside forces that causes more problems amongst inside the house. We understand that. Understand that history, figure out the problems and the patterns and how it even existed for this long. End it. Cut off the head of a snake. That's the best way to kill a snake. Cut it off once and for all. And then we continue fixing up the house and then fighting out the outside forces together. And we teach those coming into the house what the problem was and how it lasted for so long, like we talked about in the beginning of the episode. For one race to overcome their internal struggles, you understand there's a problem inside the house, patch it up, fix it. It's going to take time. It's going to take a long time. There's a lot of different languages. There's a lot of different understandings of dealing with each other and coming to a sense of peace and mutual agreement. But it has to be done today, not tomorrow. Tomorrow's not promised. So I make an offer of those willing to take that chance. Let's work on it today while we still have it, because tomorrow's not promised, and we want to give ourselves the best of chances tomorrow. And one thing I want to say is that the idea that I gave of the house, as far as blacks trying to fix all the problems inside, to who I am as a person, I believe that the house should be one single house and that all races should be under that single house. No separate doors, no separate rooms or anything. Everyone's in that house together. But we live in a world where every race feels as if they need their own house for their own group, because that's just how the world is. I'm under the house that where everyone is together, but I'm speaking to the house that's only for blacks that decided that they want to be that way. So I'm telling them, this is my opinion, this is what I think. It's not the solution, obviously. I'm only young. My answer will be different 10, 20, 30 years from now, as it should be, if I continue to grow and gain information from those who are still alive and those younger. And obviously you have history as well, as far as books and resources and sources to gain more information as well. So this is not the answer. I want to say this, leaving this, how can a race overcome their internal struggles? There's an African proverb, Osama. It says, if you want to go quickly, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Marcus Garvey, historical figure, thinker, philosopher, entrepreneur, what a man, especially during the 1900s, the early 1900s. His story, remarkable. Coming from Jamaica. Yeah, the African proverb, it goes, if you want to go quickly, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. It's very simple, but it means so much. Like you see, of course, like you said, Marcus Garvey, his quote says, a people without the knowledge of their past history, origin, and culture is like a tree without roots. The next person I want to say, Henry Louis Gates. Thinker, great person in society. He says, the thing about Black history is that the truth is so much more complex than anything you can make up. Lastly, Malcolm X. We started with Malcolm. In the middle, we gave another Malcolm quote. We're going to end with Malcolm. Malcolm X, he says, there can be no black-white unity until there is first some black unity. We cannot think of uniting with others until after we have first united amongst ourselves. We cannot think of becoming acceptable to others until we have first proven acceptable to ourselves. And when it comes to this internal war amongst each other, between blacks, amongst issues about colorism, about whether you have to be a square, a soft, a nerd, versus being tough, aggressive, a thug. There's so much different dilemmas. There's so much different concepts. There's so much of everything that I could have dived into, but we didn't have the time. I just want to give a light introduction into something that's been going on for hundreds of years, for something that's been in the background, the shadow, taking over our minds and our perception of how we view each other and how we interact with each other. And because of this, it has also helped with the destruction and the plight that we still suffer up until this day. And if we could figure out what's going on in the background, the hidden enemy, then we could obviously erase that to gain momentum and gain strength and our goal to succession. But we must do that together. We have to. We both came from our mothers. So if you came from your mother the same, how can I fight with my brother? We walk the same steps. We go through the same journey, the same problems from the outside. Why do I feel as if I have to run away when I see you, the one in the mirror? Let's do better. Let's be better. And let's change the world.
You guys thought we were done? I don't think so. We still gotta wrap it up. Please follow me at Kusa300. Follow my co-host Muhammad at Muhammad.global. Make sure to follow our page at Instagram. Also, make sure to subscribe to all our platforms. We drop every Wednesday at 12 p.m. Thank you. We'll see you next week.